Good afternoon. I hope this video finds you alive and well. It is February 10th, 2021, and I wanted to talk today about the difference between personal power and fear. And I wanted to share a little bit about my own journey through that and some things that I picked up along the way, and hopes that it can inspire you in your journey in this as well. When I was 22 years old, I got married and to a man who was going into the ministry. And our first church, we took, I should say he took, but the pastor's wife has a lot of, his life becomes her life. So at 23 years old, I was a pastor's wife in a very small country church. And we joke and say the population of Pine Meadows was 3 people, myself and my husband and our dog. And later on, our cat. We had a cat back there too, but we were really out in the middle of nowheres. And so much so, we were so isolated that I had a lot of anxiety out there. I didn't think that I would, but I couldn't wait to get out there at first because it was so beautiful and peaceful. But it was a very small church, and they had kind of crucified every pastor. There was a pastor for 40 years, and when he left, then they went through 3 pastors in a very short time because it was hard for them to accept new things and new ideas. And it was a small church, and we were able to really build that church up from about 25 people to 150 if they all came the same week. There's a lot of farmers out there. But by the time we left, 3 years later, but during that time, I had a lot of ideas that I tried to implement and a lot of things. And some of them did go through, mostly when I worked with the teens. But the older adults were not able to accept a lot of this. And they thought I was strange. And there was a lot of things that happened out there, like they went to the district superintendent to tell on me because they said, well, she's just jumping out of bed in the morning and throwing her makeup on and showering and throwing her makeup on and coming to church with her hair wet. Well, it turns out I had the wet look. If anyone remembers back in the 80s, the wet look where you scrunched your hair and you had all that gel on it. So long story short, what happened over that 3 years is I became very fearful and very unable to get out and do things on my own. And I would have people in the church say, well, what do you mean you want a baby? These were the older people. How can you take care of a kid if you are having these panic attacks? And how could you ever get a job if you are like this? And so I remember looking at the world through the perspective of fear. Now, fear is false evidence appearing real, but we look at the world through different lenses. And a lens of fear, I notice like a lot of the TV shows these days it's all filtered light. They're all dark. They're made to induce fear. So that light, and that's what, when we look at things through the lens of fear. So for 3 years, I looked at the world through the lens of fear, and I really thought to myself, gosh, if I can't make it here in this little place, I'll never make it anywhere. And that's that was reinforced by people who I looked up to and at first respected until I saw that these people were fear driven. And so what happens is just a little bit when we look at power and fear, and then I'm going to continue this story because it's really a wonderful journey. But power it's based in light, and it's based in peace, and it's based in wanting to empower those around us. And what I didn't understand then is, had I understood that aspect, then I would have looked at those people in leadership and realized these aren't powerful people. These were people who lived there their whole lives. They never moved there. They were on the board. these were fearful people. And they set out to disempower anybody who wanted to change what they saw as normal or to change their equilibrium. And so when we live in fear, then we have this sense of unrest and we have a propensity to want to disempower people, because if we can keep everybody around us disempowered and off balance, it puts us in, we feel more control. And I don't even, I hate to even use we because I don't identify with that. But what I saw is these people could only feel in control if everybody around them did not have control. So after 3 years, my husband was voted out of there by the members, which was 11 to 10 that we leave, but the non-members voted like 45 to 1 that we stay, but their votes didn't count. And because we had built it up. But anyway, so when it came time to leave, I went and I applied for a job in the city about 40 minutes away out in Syracuse, and got a job as a counselor at the rescue mission. And I was still looking through that lens of fear. So when I started that job, I had a lot of anxiety, and my sister worked a couple miles down the road. And I said to her, if I panic, can I call you? If I need you, can you run to me at work? And she said yes. Well, that was all I needed to know, is that she would, but I never needed to do it. But what I started discovering is all of a sudden I had a place that needed me and said, hey, can you take this on? Can you take that on? And so I went from feeling like I used to measure my stress, like they have those charts of stress points. And I go, oh no, if I get to this point, you can have a breakdown or you can have a health problem. And I used to measure, and I was very aware of my PMS every month. But now I realize it was because I was in this box. I didn't have a whole lot more to think about. And so when I got out there, suddenly it was, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this initiative? And I was in a situation where the environment that I worked in was like the Hill Street Blue police station. There was always a crisis and always something really bizarre and funky. And at first I was like, oh no, like I got to handle this perfectly or they're going to fire me. And there was one incident where I actually got trapped behind my desk and had a guy growling at me and telling me he was a devil and I needed to worship him. And when other staff realized what was going on and came and helped, then they sent me to the next room to call the police. And I was literally in there going, I'm calling from the rescue mission. And I'm trying to explain to them what's going on. And so after the event, anytime there was a crisis, they would pull us into a room and they would tell us, we would have to process it and we would have to say, what can I do better? And we had a lot of crisis intervention training and crisis prevention training. But I had only been there 2 weeks when this happened. And so I remember going into that meeting in fear and trepidation, looking through my dark glasses of fear and saying, oh my gosh, this is it. Since I was in there crying, calling the police, they're going to fire me. And I was even doubting, am I cut out for this job? And when we started having the discussion and processing it, and the other workers were started talking about it, the guy who told me, go call the police, starts doing this whole imitation of me. And there's Mary Beth in there, and all this. And everybody there was just laughing hysterically. And I remember just laughing and laughing. And that was the moment I said, oh my gosh, I can be here. Because in that other box I was in, when I was surrounded by fearful people, they would have said, what's wrong with you? And it would have been this huge deal. And it would have been one more, what would I say, check on my list, or one more stress point to say, you really aren't all that. You really can't handle life. And so what I started finding is when these events would happen and we would process them and we were serious, but we could laugh about them. I laughed and had so much joy. And I ended up being in that job for 14 years. And I went from that person who was measuring my stress points to being pregnant working in that environment, to having 3 children over those 14 years, to being promoted to a huge job running a big, very active, high profile department there, and not feeling stressed out and going on to flip houses and do coaching and leadership training and things. And so what I discovered is when we look, when our box is too small, then we tend to get into a fear mode. So this can happen to us when we're in a toxic relationship, when we are surrounded by people who limit us, whether it's in a job. If you're in a job or you're someplace and you feel this going on, then what that's an indication of, if you start feeling fear, then chances are your box is too small. And what you're really experiencing is claustrophobia. So when I went to this, when I was working at the rescue mission with homeless and seeing all this, but what I discovered is about the difference between personal power and fear is and I saw it a little bit with some of the workers there, that maybe more the leaders or sometimes with other employees, but not like I did up there. And what I discovered was those who operated in fear mode did everything they could to keep other people off balance or to cause conflict and chaos. And those who were empowered, who had personal power, and sometimes it could be the lowest guy that could empower, and it could be somebody up here who was always trying to knock everybody in balance. And so what I learned is the true powerful people, and I put myself in that, are the people who empower others. Because when you empower the people around you, a natural thing happens. It bumps you up. Whether there could be somebody that comes along that can do your job better than you, it puts you in a position, especially to build a resume or for wherever you're going, to say, hey, I raised this person up and I brought them from here to here. So when we have personal power, we recognize that there is power in empowering others. But what I also saw is those who operated through the lens of fear were constantly trying to knock people out of the way and disempower and put them in a negative light. And so the natural element that comes from that is you can never, when you're trying to knock the people around you down, you might be able to get up here. We all know those people slip into leadership positions. Sometimes it's because of who they know, it's because of money, it's because of who their spouse is or whatever. But when you're busy looking at who your competition is and worrying and trying to assess threats and all this, you're never really going to get much farther than there. And people, you might fool some people, but people know who you are, especially those who maybe aren't in your financial or social or status in that place. But people know who you are, and on an energy level, it keeps you tethered. And so I've seen people start, and we see it all the time. We see these motivational speakers out there that are really successful that started here, but they went out and they understood that personal empowerment is based in light, it's based in peace, it's based in empowering others, or personal power, I should say. And fear is based in dark, it's unrest, it's not a sense of peace, and it's disempowering. So as I went through and started, over the years, I eventually moved to Lower Alabama, and I saw some dynamics play out. And I got to tell you, I love that time in Lower Alabama. It is, I have seen a lot of fun and levity and laughter that sometimes you don't see in the colder states because you're just too rigid trying to work through that code. However, one of the things that I saw was there's a really strong spirit of nepotism. And so I watched new people come in, and I had to redefine myself. By this point, I had been flipping houses. I was running a HUD contracting business and still doing the coaching and leadership trainings as well, developing that as well. But when I got down here, I thought, well, in order to buy a house, I have to show a steady income. And so I'm going to go get a job. And after 3 years, it was very, very hard because people would hire who they knew. And so I could go and get wined and dined, and they would ask me all my ideas and all this, and then go hire Jimmy John or Sally Sue because that was who they knew, whether or not they were qualified. And so I realized that in order for me to succeed, I started looking at things through that lens of fear. And there was one time I actually, in the midst of fear, went into a church and went to the office, and I'm like, I need a job. This is an emergency. I'm going to be homeless. And I knew as soon as the words came out, it was like I was seeing myself from a different perspective, because I remember everybody in there just froze and looked at me like, who are you? And I'm like, I don't want money from anyone. I want a job, because I went from owning a total over the years of like 15 properties to selling everything off to start a new life in the South. And just those first couple of years, it was just not being able to lift off the ground because of that, because of the nepotism. But as soon as I said that, and they all looked at me, then it was almost like I was pulled out of my body, and I was looking at myself from another perspective. And it said, you are putting out an energy of fear, and that's what you're going to get back. You're going to reap that. And so I knew right then, this was the wrong thing to do. Now, these ladies were very kind, and they did give me some contacts and things. And ironically, I interviewed for a fantastic job for that. And then they ended up hiring Sally Sue. And so it was for HR director to very, very nice senior residents. And but what happened was I was able to realize, hey, I've slipped back down into that fear place. And in order for me to survive here, I am going to have to take a different approach. And I'm going to have to get out of this kind of matrix that we see society of, that we have to wait for somebody to give us permission to move to that next step or succeed in order to succeed. And so I realized I've got to do something different. And so I went out and started rebuilding in different ways. And I would have people tell me, well, you got to go volunteer and prove yourself. And what I found was all that did was have people there assess me to decide what category they can put me in. And it didn't really get me anywhere, because in the end, they were going to hire, Janie or Jimmy John or one of them. And they weren't going to hire me. And so I did end up getting hired by a national school, ITT Tech, and as a student representative in recruiting and kind of being their counselor all the way through. And I worked there for 3.5 years and was able to buy a house again. And that was kind of the beginning. But at the same time, I built some other things, and I just had to start changing but how I looked at it. And one of the things that I saw in this with other, what we call here newbies, is people doing the same thing, hanging around all the well-known people, the established people, the locals, and kind of just groveling. Now, I will say I don't feel I did that, but just groveling, like, can you drop me a crumb? Can you do something? Can you give me some connection? And they did. They would throw you a $10 an hour little here. They need someone for this or that. And which was an insult when you've had years of experience in education and things. But what I found is that the more people groveled, the less empowered they were. And so I started trying to pull people who were new together and say, look, what we need to do is just empower each other. When we look to somebody else to empower us, especially what I found is the nepotism here was it was the same dynamic that I saw at Pine Meadows, but not as overt because they weren't mean. Like at Pine Meadows, it was like, don't change anything in our little world. But, this is kind of a city where everybody kind of knows everybody. But it was kind of, well, we don't really necessarily want new ideas. And um, we, we don't know you. That's a lot of what it is we're going to hire who and what we know regardless. We can, you know, uh, I see people get positions that they're completely not ready for, but they'll get the business just because of who they're related to. So anyway, I realized that this was something that a lot of people were doing. They were just kind of groveling. And well, if I buy a new car, I had a woman come to me and say, look, uh, she moved away and said, I'm moving back. And when I do, I'm going to go find the most important people to be friends with because then I can get wherever I want. And I said, well, why do you need them? Well, you have to have them. And she is from this area, but not from the city. But you have to have them. You have to know all the important people. But this kind of disempowerment by looking to other people, then we can stop that. We can empower ourselves and we can disempower disempowerment, if you know what I mean, by not giving an audience to fearful people. These people are like this and they're great people. I mean, it's a wonderful city, but they're like this because of fear of having a new element or assessing. And sometimes the worst people aren't the ones who have been there their whole lives. It's other new people that came in that because of some type of position or something, they were able to maybe get into that inner circle a little bit. And so what they do is they're the ones out there guarding, like, I don't want any other new people in. I'm going to slap them out. And so the more audience we give this and the more power we do by becoming fearful ourselves and putting ourselves under that, the more disempowered we are. So I want to encourage you as if you find yourself struggling with fear, with insecurity, first of all, know that feeling a little bit insecure or feeling like an imposter that's typical for all of us. We, when we are starting something new, we're waiting for somebody to turn around and go, wait a minute, who do you think you are? Tell me what your background is or all this. And so all of us have that day, the day before the first day that we're endeavoring on something. So just understand that it's okay to have those feelings. But a lot of time those feelings come because you're claustrophobic. You've been in somebody else's box or where the world that you are in that you have outgrown. And if we are not growing, we are decompensating. And fear is a huge part of decompensating. So when we do this and we get more claustrophobic, then we kind of panic and it manifests in ways of generalized anxiety or depression or panic attacks or illness or things like that. And the other thing is to don't give audience to people who are fearful people. And the way to tell the difference is, are these people affirming and empowering, or are they guarding? And if they're guarding, we can look at the media and see this. We can look, if there's a lot of chaos and that type of thing, look at him, look at this, look at that, then we know we're looking at fearful people, and that's not where we want to give our audience. And it kind of goes back to the story of the two wolves. One is based in fear and the other in faith. And which one wins? Well, the one that wins is the one that you feed. So, uh, one more element to understand too is, and this is what I've tried to share with the newbies. And so, the best way to describe it is we need to know how to heal ourselves, and we need to be willing to heal ourselves. And by that I mean we need to be able to self pacify when we don't get that validation from those people that we think are important. And again, most of those are fear based people. Then we need to be able to give that to ourselves. And when we don't feel good, when we feel anxious, personal power is being able to self pacify. A baby soothes themselves. Maybe they suck their thumb or a pacifier, or they play, or they gurgle. Or I know my youngest, I remember one day her in the bedroom, and she was about 5 years old, and she was crying over something that I wouldn't let her do. And and all of a sudden we hear her in there. She had this little piano that would, if you push a button, it would play songs. And we heard her in there going, twinkle, twinkle, little. And one by one, my son's teenage friend, he was 17. He was the first one down the hall, and he's out there peeking in. And then I come out, and I'm looking, and my son comes down the stairs, and everyone's spying on her. But what it was is she knew how to self pacify, and she did it by singing, even when she was crying. So as you go along, understand that part of personal power. And I would tell the newbies this: you have to be able to self pacify. You have to be able to heal yourself, because if you can't, you'll be forever in a state of deficit, forever waiting for somebody to fill that for you. And of course, we know that the ultimate filling comes from God and our spirituality and our relationship, which is in here. It's not something we have to go out and grovel. It's in here. We just have to accept it and open ourselves to it. So I just want to encourage you today, as you go about your day, to look at things, ask yourself, what lens am I looking for this through? If you are feeling the anxiety and the fear and the panic, then that's the lens. If you are stuck in that place, you're looking through the wrong lens. So when you start finding yourself wondering who the competition is and who you got to knock off, you're not empowered. You're afraid. So start asking yourself, is it peace or is it unrest? Is it light? Is it dark? Is it empowering? Is it disempowering? And that's how you will be able to tell where you are coming from and how you're looking at this. So again, I hope this helps. There's going to be more on this. There's a ton of things you can do physically to help manage your fear and panic and anxiety and physicalness. And I'm going to do a video in a couple of days on that. So some things that you can do to lay a good foundation. But if you want to know more about me, I'm Mary Beth Sabatek. I'm the founder of the Psychoenergetic Institute. And I'm the developer of the energy model of therapeutic change. So you can visit us online at theenergymodelofchange.com. You can friend our Facebook page, the Psychoenergetic Institute, and you see me on YouTube. It's the Your Amazing Soul. So click on and subscribe to that, and join us in this journey, because we give a lot of tips, myself and my coaches who have just come on board, on how to look at the whole, your 9 energy core areas. One of them is physical, and what can I do so that when I get out there and try that new thing, when I get out of this box and I have that first day where I'm debuting and I'm feeling like an imposter, what can I do physically to help give me a peaceful physical existence, with that anxiety and things, and without having to go take Valium or something. So anyway, we offer a lot of that. See us on our website and on Facebook. And I hope you'll join me again for some of the future videos, and check out some of the other at our at Your Amazing Soul on YouTube. And thank you for watching. Have a great day.